Today, we're diving into a story that literally redefined modern pop culture. We're talking about a group that completely dominated the music industry and captured the hearts of millions across the globe. But, beneath all those sold-out stadiums and that shiny, perfect pop surface, there is a remarkable yet deeply tragic history. We're going to unpack the trajectory of the world's biggest boy band, One Direction, to really understand how this massive dream turned into a crushing reality for the young men at the center of it all.
Does it ever drive you crazy just how fast the night changes? Think about that hauntingly beautiful lyric from their hit song Night Changes for a second. It just hits incredibly different today, doesn't it? As we get into this, we're going to see exactly how quickly these 5 young lives were permanently altered by a massive machine that they barely even understood when they first signed up.
So let's take it back to where it all started, the X Factor miracle. In 2010, Harry Styles, Zayn Malik, Niall Horan, Liam Payne, and Louis Tomlinson showed up to audition as solo artists. And we really need to remember how innocent and young they were here. I mean, they ranged from just 16 to 18 years old. They had absolutely zero prior experience with fame. When they didn't make the cut individually, judges Nicole Scherzinger and Simon Cowell essentially accidentally formed them into a group. By 2011, their debut single What Makes You Beautiful went completely viral, skyrocketing to #1. And by 2012, they were thrown straight into the deep end of global stadium tours and absolute mass hysteria.
To put that hysteria into perspective for a second, 70 million. That is how many records One Direction sold worldwide. They sparked an internet fandom on a scale that we had never really seen before. It was a cultural phenomenon comparable today only to massive acts like BTS. But as you'll see, that shiny surface of mega success hid a deeply, deeply controlled environment. Okay, let's dive into this contrast between the whole manufactured boy band image and the actual human beings living it. Simon Cowell's psycho management heavily stripped the boys of their autonomy. They were assigned these strict one-dimensional tropes designed specifically to appeal to their primary demographic of teenage girls. They weren't treated as developing artists. Actually, scratch that. They weren't treated as artists at all. They were treated as highly profitable products.
The personas they were handed stood in staggering contrast to their reality behind closed doors. You had Zayn boxed in as the bad boy with the leather jackets, but in reality, he was a deeply introverted kid dealing with severe anxiety. Liam was branded the sensible leader while secretly struggling with profound isolation and addiction. Niall, the cute Irish boy, was sometimes literally forced to perform through physical knee injuries. Louis, the funny rebel, was trying to cope with the heartbreaking loss of his mother and sister with very little industry support. And Harry, the rock star, found his privacy entirely stripped away during his most formative teenage years. Everything, and I mean everything, from their hairstyles to their public behavior, was tightly scripted.
The hidden toll of all this unprecedented fame was absolutely suffocating. Just to avoid the massive, chaotic crowds of mobbing fans outside, the boys were frequently trapped in their hotel rooms for their own safety. This meant endless hours spent completely isolated. And think about it, what's sitting right there in every luxury hotel room? A fully stocked minibar. You combine that kind of isolation with a relentless touring schedule and zero creative control over your own life, and it just breeds a perfect storm for deep psychological distress. And this brilliantly illustrates the dark reality of that situation. Liam Payne later revealed the extent of his struggles in a podcast interview, making just a heartbreaking admission. He said he relied on heavy drinking and pills as a coping mechanism simply to survive the toxic, isolating environment the band was constantly subjected to. So naturally, with all that immense pressure building up, it was only a matter of time before the facade cracked. And the first major break came from Zayn Malik. Behind the scenes, Zayn was fighting silent battles that the public knew absolutely nothing about at the time. Just look at the intense pressure Zayn was facing on a daily basis. He was a huge R&B fan who wanted to make R&B music, but he was forced to record up to 50 vocal takes just to sound adequately pop enough for management. He was denied basic personal choices, like literally just growing a beard, to preserve his assigned image. This total lack of control led to crippling stage anxiety, and tragically, he even developed an eating disorder. He'd go for days without eating, simply because food was the one and only thing in his heavily dictated life that he felt he could actually control. When Zayn suddenly departed the band in March of 2015, the media, and honestly a lot of fans, were quick to label it a betrayal. But looking back now at the overwhelming evidence of his mental and physical distress, we have to ask, was leaving actually the ultimate act of self-preservation? It wasn't a slight to his bandmates at all. It was a desperate, absolutely necessary bid to save his own mental health. And the tensions weren't just internal, right? They were boiling over behind closed doors. Liam Payne shared this shocking detail on a podcast, describing a physical altercation where a bandmate actually threw him against a wall. It really highlights just how deeply fractured and exhausted the band had become under the immense weight of their grueling lifestyle. The magic of One Direction was breaking. Which brings us to the final and undoubtedly most heartbreaking chapter of this story. And I want to handle this with the utmost empathy and respect. Because in October 2024, the world received the truly devastating news of Liam Payne's passing. Let's move to and see how this builds, because tracing those chilling and lonely final days Liam spent in Argentina reveals a really tragic sequence of events. He initially arrived in Buenos Aires to support his former bandmate Niall Horan at a concert. It was supposed to be a short trip, but his stay extended, and after his girlfriend left for Florida on October 14th, Liam was alone. By October 16th, reports of highly erratic behavior surfaced, including him smashing a laptop in his hotel room. And later that same day, he suffered a fatal fall from his third-floor balcony. Toxicology reports later indicated heavy substance use. What is so deeply troubling here are the warning signs that were entirely ignored. Liam had sent desperate messages to his ex-fiancée Maya, saying point blank, "I'm not well." He had a very well-documented track record of severe substance abuse stemming all the way back to his teenage years in the band. Earlier in 2024, he even faced an emergency hospitalization for kidney problems. These were very, very clear cries for help, but they were often just brushed off by the public as typical erratic celebrity behavior, leaving him without the systemic mental health support that he so desperately needed from the machine around him. You know, for years, millions of fans had hoped and prayed for a One Direction reunion. And in November 2024, that reunion finally did happen in England, but under the absolute worst, most devastating circumstances imaginable. At a somber church service, exactly 1 month after the fatal fall, Harry Styles, Zayn Malik, Niall Horan, and Louis Tomlinson came together to say goodbye to their brother. A horse-drawn carriage brought Liam's body to the service. Even Simon Cowell was in attendance, visibly emotional. The band released a joint statement expressing their profound grief. And there's just a deeply tragic irony here that Liam, the one member who had always been the most vocal about wanting a band reunion, was ultimately the reason they were brought back together. So the crucial point is really captured right here in Liam's own words. He said this during an interview when reflecting on his complicated relationship with Zayn Malik. He showed immense empathy, noting that you really have to understand what someone has been through to judge where they are. This quote just brilliantly encapsulates the shared, unspoken trauma all 5 of these boys carried.
They were pushed to the absolute limit, forced into a massive corporate machine they didn't understand, and then largely left to deal with the psychological aftermath completely on their own.
Which leaves us with this final, massive question. What does the music industry actually owe to the young stars it manufactures? One Direction gave the world some of the most joyful, memorable pop music of an entire decade, but as we've seen today, it came at a devastating human cost. When we finally look past the shiny pop facades, the sold-out stadiums, and the carefully crafted personas, we have to ask ourselves how we can do better to protect the actual human beings behind the music. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer.